I had the TV turned on in the hotel room and was watching a popular TV preacher while I was getting ready to go in the morning, and he was preaching on this idea that God has come so that we could experience an abundant life. It's a beautiful truth. He used one of my favorite verses in John chapter 10. Verse 10 reads like this. Jesus says, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Abundant life. That's why Jesus has come. That's a good truth. I mean, that's what you want to think about as you start your day. You want to grab a hold of that with both hands. You want to claim that Jesus has come, that we could live this full and abundant life. And yet, that's not the whole verse. Like, this is all that was up on the screen, but you'll notice that there are 3 dots right before this quote. Anybody remember from grammar class what the word is for 3 dots? Yeah, ellipses, good job. So whenever you see an ellipses, that means that there's certain words or a number of words that have been left out that should not affect necessarily the meaning of what you're reading. And so he had this ellipses followed by this great promise of Jesus. But there's some pretty significant words that are omitted from this verse, from this thought sentence. Here's what he left out, that the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Well, I get it. Right? I mean, that's not quite as feel good. We don't necessarily love to think about the fact that we have an enemy, and the enemy's goal and purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. But look, if all we do is teach and talk about this truth, that Jesus has come that we can have abundant life, but we don't put it in the context of spiritual warfare, if we don't understand the reality that there's an enemy who wants to steal the abundant life, who wants to kill the abundant life and destroy the abundant life, if we don't understand the full truth, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. We're going to be on dangerous ground because we're going to be living like, hey, it's vacation all the time, when in reality, there is a battle that's being waged. There is a war that's going on. So the truth is that Jesus has come so we could experience abundant life. And the enemy would like you to just kind of claim that and leave out the rest. He would much prefer to just be replaced by 3 little dots, not be aware of his schemes, and not be aware that he is waging war against you and your family, but we have an enemy who has come to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And so in this series that we're calling Flip the Script, what we're doing is we are identifying Satan's primary weapon, that he is a liar. Everything he says is a lie. John tells us that lying is his native tongue. It's his language. Everything he says, everything that comes out of his mouth is deception. He twists the truth. He is a master manipulator. And so what we want to do in this series is we want to identify some of his lies that many of us have believed. Maybe we've believed them because it was something we were taught early on and we've just accepted. Maybe we've believed them because a lot of other people believe them and we don't want to be the only one who doesn't believe them. But these lies that we believe, we live by. And when we live by a lie, we give it the power of truth in our lives. And so the enemy is always handing us a script every day. Every day, he hands you a script to read. And in the script he hands you, it's just full of lies about you, about your identity, about God, how he loves you, how he feels about you, just full of lies. But if we believe the lies, and we live by the lies, it has the power of truth. Here's how we said it last week. When we believe a lie, we live by a lie, necessarily. When we live by a lie, we give it the power of truth in our lives. And kind of the silly, insignificant example we used was that when we eat carrots, a lot of us have eaten carrots over the years believing the lie that carrots will give you good eyesight. It's not true. They don't improve your vision. But because we believe it's true, many of us, we have eaten carrots. We've made sure our kids eat carrots. And so in believing that it's true, we've given it the power of truth. That is to say, we live by it. We eat it. And so what are some more significant ways that this dynamic is at play, where the enemy tells us these lies, and that has significant implications on our lives? So maybe you believe the lie that God doesn't care about you. And because you don't think he really cares about you, you have allowed your heart to become hard towards him, and you've become bitter, you've become angry towards God, maybe during a time when you've really needed him. Or maybe you believe the lie that you could never change, because the enemy is going to tell you that lie all day long. You can't change. It's too late for you, too much of a mess. It's always going to be this way. And if you believe that lie, then you're not gonna try to change. In fact, you'll probably go deeper into your addiction or deeper into your sin, and things are only gonna get worse. Or maybe you've believed the lie, God just wants you to be happy. Maybe that's the lie you've believed. And because you believe it, that's really all that matters, is as long as you're happy, God's okay, then maybe you haven't fought for some things you needed to fight for. Maybe you haven't struggled through some things that you needed to struggle through because it didn't make you happy. Or maybe you've believed the lie that money wouldn't make you happy, and so you've just sacrificed a tremendous amount in hopes that a little bit more money would make you happy. Or maybe you've believed the lie that you'll never be good enough, and that your mistakes can never really be forgiven and redeemed. And as a result, you've lived with guilt. Every day, the enemy tells you, you've blown it, it's too late for you, you can't be forgiven, not after what you've done. And you keep reading from that script, and you just live with the weight of guilt. Guilt always surfaces in anger towards yourself, and then it just spills out onto your relationships. And so when we believe a lie, it has tremendous implications on our lives. And so in this series, we want to expose the lie of the enemy, and we want to embrace the truth that will set us free. And so last week, we talked about a lie that goes like this: you don't have what it takes. You don't have what it takes. You're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not capable enough. You don't have what it takes. And last week, we were set free by the truth of Jesus from Philippians 4, that in him we have what it takes. So that when the enemy comes and says, you don't have what it takes, we say, yeah, you're right, but I know who does. And the one who is in me is greater than the one who is in the world, that in Christ we are more than conquerors. We are set free by the truth. This weekend, we're talking about a different lie, but it's kind of the opposite side of the same coin. These things go together. And the lie that we're talking about this week is you can fix it yourself. You can fix it yourself. And the enemy would love for you to believe this. It's the lie of pride. That it refuses to ask for help when we need it. It's desperate to hide mistakes when the only hope for healing and recovery is revealing them. It's the lie that causes us to not admit fault, or not admit that we're incapable. It's the lie that causes us to insist, I can do this myself. And so while last week, you don't have what it takes, it's kind of the lie of insecurity. This week, you can fix it yourself, is the lie of pride. Again, pride and insecurity go together. These things are not mutually exclusive. They go together. Oftentimes, you'll see the enemy use one lie with one person and the other lie with another person. But he knows if he can get us to buy into this, you can fix it yourself lie, that God will suddenly not be necessary. Those of us who struggle with this, when we say, I can fix it myself, or maybe say, you can fix it yourself, this it here is not necessarily referring to an inanimate object, right? Like, this is a person for you. Like, you can fix it yourself. Like, you're sitting next to it right now. Like, don't look at it, but you're sitting next to it. Or some of you are gonna go home to it. You're just gonna, it is waiting for you at home. And you know it's your job to fix it. Some of you, you feel like it's your job, you're raising a bunch of little its. You've just got these, and you feel like it's your job to fix them, and you think, if I could just read enough books and take enough notes and attend enough classes, then I could do my job, I could fix them. And so you go around, and your job is to fix people. Is that working for you? Is that going pretty well? People like living with you and all? Is that how that is playing out? But what happens is we find our identity in that. And we feel like their success is where we measure our success, and puts lots of pressure on things, and it creates either a spirit of pride or a spirit of insecurity. Or maybe the it in your life is not a person, maybe it is a financial situation, or an addiction, or a marriage, or a health issue, or a broken relationship, or a secret sin. And the enemy whispers, and even now, he will say, you don't need any help. You don't need any help with this. Don't tell anybody about it. You don't need to let anyone know about your struggle. You don't need to let anyone know about the situation you're in. They don't want to help you anyway. You give it another few weeks or a few months, you can do it, you can fix it yourself. You don't need anybody else. God doesn't really care. There's so many other problems in the world. He doesn't care about what you're going through right now. You don't need him anyway. You can fix it yourself. And it's this lie, I think, that is especially appealing to Western culture because we put a premium on this idea of independence and of self-sufficiency. We value the self-starters and the self-sustainers, and that's us. It marks our culture. We are the resume builders, and we're taught from an early age that, you take your achievements and you put them in a case for everybody to see, and you take your accomplishments and you frame them and hang them on the wall. It's a lie that seems to be embraced by our human nature. There's something within us that really wants to believe it's true, that we can fix it ourselves. You think about it, some of the first words a child will form into a sentence are the words, by myself. Even when they can't do it by themselves. They want to try, they want to do it. Even when they need help, they want to do it by themselves. Or what about this phrase? I got this. I got this. Nothing good ever comes after someone saying, I got this. It's not going to end well. But let me ask you this, okay? So when you hear the phrase, I got this, if you just had to choose which gender would most often say, I got this, what would you say, male or female? Male, yeah, there seems to be consensus here. Right, so last week we talked about this lie the enemy will often use on women. We spoke specifically of mothers in our application, that you don't have what it takes. We found out in Christ we do. But oftentimes with men, he will speak this lie. It appeals to our pride, that you can fix it yourself, you don't need any help. And we want to agree with that. We live in kind of this DIY culture, this do-it-yourself culture. You see this a lot on these home improvement shows these days where a couple will come in and they want to do some kind of home remodeling project themselves, and they're full of optimism. And then like halfway through, everything goes wrong. And then it costs them all kinds of money and more time than they ever thought they would spend on it. And that seems to be the common theme. It costs them a lot more than they wanted to pay, and it takes them a lot longer than they thought it would take. And so it is that when we insist on doing it ourselves, we just can expect it. When we should ask for help and we don't ask for help, we're going to find ourselves in a position that becomes increasingly costly. And so the Bible gives us a number of examples of how this looks when we kind of buy into this idea that we don't need any help. And so here's one example, it's Genesis chapter 16, where Abraham and Sarah are told that they're going to have a son who will be the beginning of a great nation. But Sarah is past the age of bearing children, and so some time passes, and she starts to think that God probably needs her help because he's not helping her, and so she decides she's going to take things into her own hands. And so here's the plan that she comes up with in verse 2. She says to her husband, go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. The young woman over here, go sleep with her, have a child with her. Maybe that's the way we should do this thing. And so Sarah ends up getting pregnant as well. And there's all kinds of drama and conflict, as you might imagine. And even today, thousands of years later, much of the conflict between Muslims and Christians and Muslims and Jews can all be traced back to Abraham and Sarah deciding we can fix this ourselves. We don't need God's help. We can make this happen on our own. 1 Samuel 13 is another example. You have King Saul, who has this, looks like just a really good opportunity to attack the Philistines, but the window is closing. So he's waiting for the priest Samuel to come and to offer sacrifices and ask God for help before going into battle. But Samuel seems to be running late, right? It just seems like Saul is going to miss his opportunity to attack the Philistines, and so he decides he's not going to wait for Samuel to come and ask for God's help. He's just going to do it himself. And this is it for Saul. Like God let Saul know through Samuel that because of his defiant act of independence, that he's going to lose the kingdom. It's going to be given to a man after God's own heart, David. In the New Testament, you see this with the false teachers, the Judaizers. One of the primary lies of these false teachers went something like this, that Jesus is good, but he's not good enough. You need to do it yourself. You need to do it yourself. And, if you work at it hard enough, if you keep the right rules and you follow the right laws, it's this idea that God is nice, but he's not necessary. Don't put your trust in Jesus. Put your trust in your own works and in your own efforts. And so the enemy tells us the lie. that we can fix ourselves, because he knows if we just buy into that for, a long enough time, everything's gonna come crashing down. It's gonna cause significant problems and destruction. So here's what happens when we buy into the lie. One, it increases pride. I don't need anyone or anything else. That is to say, the longer I go without recognizing that I need help, the higher the stakes get. There's a sense in which when a young person goes through a very difficult circumstance and realizes at a young age that they can't do this alone, that they need help, that's a beautiful gift, because the longer they wait to figure that out, the higher the stakes get. So a few weeks ago, my wife was telling me that she had a few fairly large trees that she wanted to have cut down from the front yard. I'm guessing they were 20 feet tall, maybe 50. It's hard to tell from the ground. And so she takes me out to show me these two trees that she wanted to have cut down. And I'm feeling pretty good about myself because this is the first 20 years of marriage almost, and she's never asked me to cut down anything. And so I realized she's gonna ask me to cut these trees down. In my mind, I'm already picking out what kind of flannel shirt I'm gonna wear for the project. And so she kind of finishes telling me what she wanted done, and then she ended the conversation with, so if you don't mind calling someone this week to take care of that, I would really appreciate it. Well, wait, what? I have a chainsaw. I can cut this down. And so I just say, oh, no, baby, I got this. And she kind of paused for a minute. I think she knew that the next words were really important. And so she said, I know you're too busy. I don't want you to have to worry about that. You know what, forget I said anything. Right, she's backtracking big time now. Forget I said anything. I'll take care of it myself. So the next day, I got out my chainsaw, and I went to cut down those trees. And I know what you're thinking. Like you're thinking, oh, it's going to go wrong. You're thinking he's going to go to the hospital. You're thinking there's been major structural damage done. No, nailed it. It went perfectly. I cut down these two redwoods, and it went brilliantly. So much so that when I was finished, I started walking around looking at some other trees, some bigger trees. And I'm thinking, there's some other trees I should probably introduce to Sue Pelham. Sue Pelham is the name of my chainsaw because it's named after my 5th grade teacher who could cut you down without breaking a sweat. And so I thought, there's some other trees that kind of need to be taken care of. And then I started working on the sermon, and I realized what was happening, right? Like because this went well over here, suddenly I'm ready to up it. I'm ready to make the stakes go a little bit higher, the tree's a little bit bigger, the tree's a little bit closer to the house. Because I thought, and I stopped, okay, so I never went there. But that's how it works. We do well, we fix something ourselves, and it can lead to this pride, and suddenly the stakes get higher. Which leads to the second consequence is that it minimizes, when we buy into the lie we can fix it ourselves, it minimizes legitimate problems or legitimate challenges. And we look at things that are difficult and we say, well, that's nothing I can't handle. See, in order for us to buy the lie, I can fix it myself, it necessarily requires me to look at projects that need fixed through an unrealistic and blindly optimistic worldview. Because the only way I can buy this lie is to look over here at these challenges and these struggles and these problems and say, it's okay, they're not that big of a deal. And that's what the enemy would love. The enemy would love for you to look at your drinking problem or your spending problem or your anger problem or your marriage problem or your lust problem and would love for you to think, it's not really that big of a deal. Next, when we buy into this lie, it feeds guilt because a lot of us have this mentality, I made the mess, I need to clean it up, I can't clean this mess up. So when you kind of grow up thinking if you make a mess, you have to clean it up, and then you make a mess and you can't clean it up, you just end up carrying this weight, and that's what the enemy will do. He will wake you up and tell you, you can do it. You can fix this yourself. And then you try and you can't, and he says, well, what's wrong with you? And so you live with this weight, this guilt in your life. Next, it intensifies, or maybe a better word here is worsens. It worsens the fallout. I can't believe I let it get this bad. when you believe that lie, I can fix it myself, and you keep believing it, the longer you believe it, the worse things are going to get in a lot of these situations. You'll hear doctors talk about this, where they'll have a patient come to them, and if they would have come when the symptoms first started to surface, then something could have been done, but they waited so long. Now that they come, things are pretty overwhelming. Here's another consequence, is it robs intimacy in our relationships. I can't be vulnerable enough to admit that I need help. See, when I buy into the lie, I can fix it myself, then I don't trust other people to help me with the challenges that I'm experiencing. And so I can tell you from personal experience, I have robbed myself at times from having more significant or deeper relationships because of my I can fix it myself mentality. Instead of trusting somebody enough to be vulnerable and to say, I need help here, I keep it to myself and think, I got it. I've experienced this in my marriage, especially early on, where I had this idea that being a man meant I didn't need help, that I could fix the problems, that I didn't need to talk about my struggles. I wanted to come home at the end of the day and wanted to be strong. I don't need help, I'm here to help. And so I look back and I realize how much I needed help. I needed my wife's wisdom. I needed my wife's discernment. I needed my wife's to speak into different situations, but I didn't tell her about it. I didn't trust myself and to be vulnerable enough to talk to her about that stuff. And I look back and I think how much I would have benefited from that, but I robbed myself of it because I wanted to just believe I can fix it myself. I don't need anybody's help. But what happens when you start to ask for help? What's it do? Well, it makes that person feel valued, and then it lets you feel known. So here's somebody who knows what you're going through, knows what you're struggling with, and they feel valued because now they're able to help. And what's that do? Well, that creates intimacy in a relationship. The last thing it does when we buy into this lie, it fuels hypocrisy. I can't let anyone know how broken things really are, and so we just live with this facade. We put up a good front so that no one will know that we haven't successfully fixed these areas, and in reality, they're all broken. And so we live hypocritically, and so the enemy wants that. The enemy wants us to believe this lie because he knows the damage it'll do to our relationships. He knows the damage it'll do to us spiritually. And some of you are reading from that script. You're reading from it every day. You don't need help. You can fix it yourself. But we want to be set free from that. And so here's what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So the Hebrew writer says that Jesus is our high priest. Well, all right, that sounds nice, I guess, but it doesn't mean that much to a lot of us. But to this audience, huge. Because the high priest was the advocate. The high priest was the representative. The high priest was on the people's side, speaking to God on their behalf. And the Hebrew writer says, this is Jesus. Jesus represents you. He is in heaven and sitting at the right hand of God, speaking to God on your behalf. And if that's true, what does that do to this lie that the enemy is constantly telling us? Verse 15, it says he understands our weaknesses. The Greek word here, understands, maybe NIV says sympathizes. It's this idea that he doesn't just watch from a distance and kind of feel what we're going through, but he enters into it. That's the idea. So it's like the difference between turning on a television and seeing like images of kids in a third world country who are starving and having a heart for that, being moved by that. It's the difference between that versus going to the third world country and living the way they live and eating what they eat. It's entering into it. So that is to say, Jesus didn't sit up in heaven and just tune in to the sufferings here on earth and watch from a distance and think, oh, it's so sad what they're going through. He entered into it. He felt what we feel. He's experienced what we experience. He knows what it's like. So, because he knows what it's like, and because he is the high priest and the Son of God, what does that mean? what does that truth mean? What's it look like to live by that truth? Here's what it says in verse 16. So, let us then come boldly to the throne of our gracious God, that we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it the most. See, this is Jesus. We talk a lot about him as Savior and Lord, but he also wants to be your high priest, your advocate, your representative, the person that you go to for help. And you start reading from that script. You start reading every day from the script of Hebrews chapter 4. And you claim this truth with both hands, that when the enemy tries to tell you, you can fix it yourself, you don't need anybody's help, God doesn't really care, you start telling yourself a different story. You start telling yourself the truth, because the truth is, you have Jesus in heaven who represents you. He understands what you're going through, and because he understands, you can approach his throne with confidence, knowing that you will find grace and mercy when you need it the most.